We will be live tweeting today's webinar and encourage you to do the same using the hashtag #AcceleratedEd. Finally, please note that the slides and a recording of today's session will be available on the CCRS Center and AYPF's websites. For those of you who are new to our webinar series, the College and Career Readiness and Success Center, which is housed at the American Institutes for Research, is part of a network of federally funded centers that provide technical assistance and resources to our regional partners in the states they serve on key educational reform issues. The American Youth Policy Forum is a lead partner of the CCRS Center and is co-hosting this webinar today. As a technical assistance hub, we collaborate with federal and external centers and resource providers to promote CCRS knowledge development, dissemination, and utilization through technology-based activities such as this webinar today. We invite you to visit our website to access a copy of this webinar and to learn more about other CCRS resources and activities that may be of interest to you and your colleagues. You can also access a copy of our new brief, Understanding Accelerated Learning Across Secondary and Post-Secondary Education. The CCRS Center developed this brief to help bring some clarity to the use of the term acceleration by focusing on strategies both within and across secondary and post-secondary education that allow students to accelerate their learning, thus building momentum towards long-term success. Originally developed to serve as enrichment opportunities for students who are high achievers, accelerated learning options also have been used to engage middle and low achievers in their learning and increase academic momentum for underrepresented student populations. The purpose of our brief is to help promote understanding of the strategies both within and across secondary and post-secondary education that are using acceleration to give students academic momentum building towards success. This graphic depicts the pipeline with the ultimate goal of long-term success. As you can see by the decreasing size of the circles, we are losing students during this progression. We see acceleration as a strategy to help students gain the academic momentum they need to continue through the pipeline, leading to ultimate success in a family-sustaining wage job. Today, we have examples of both research and on-the-ground programs that demonstrate and confirm successful academic acceleration strategies. So let me introduce Jennifer Lerner, the moderator for today's webinar, to introduce our presenters and to get us started.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm first going to briefly introduce today's presenters, and then I'm going to briefly go through some of the findings from the brief that Joe mentioned on understanding accelerated learning. Our first speaker today will be Thomas Akampora, the field manager for the Talent Development Secondary at the Center for Social Organization of Schools at the Johns Hopkins University. Following Thomas's presentation, we will have a short break for some clarifying questions. Then we will hear from Melinda Karp, Senior Research Associate at the Community College Research Center at Teachers College at Columbia University. Again, following Melinda's presentation, we will have a few clarifying questions. And finally, we'll hear from Louisa Erickson, Program Administrator for Adult Education at the Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. Following Louisa's presentation, we will again have some clarifying questions, as well as an opportunity to ask some questions to our panel as a whole. We encourage you to use the question box to submit questions and indicate whether or not they're for the group or an individual presenter. So just a little bit about the issue brief that the College and Career Readiness and Success Center has produced. Accelerated learning is used as a term to encompass the strategies that we see providing opportunities to use acceleration to build academic momentum. You will hear that terminology in this space is challenging, and our intent was not to add to the confusion, but ideally provide some clarity. These strategies, regardless of whether or not they happen within or across secondary and post-secondary education, have some common features. First, they're changes to the traditional time frame, as you'll either move students ahead more quickly or allow them to recoup to stay on track, thus providing personalization and individual pacing for students. And second, they're made available to all students as needed. Within secondary, we primarily see two forms of acceleration. The first, both credit recovery and double dosing allow for students to recover content and credit as necessary to continue to move towards a high school diploma. Our brief highlights a number of different programs using these strategies, and today's webinar will feature Talent Development Secondary, one of the profiled programs. For acceleration across secondary and post-secondary education, terminology is particularly challenging, and Melinda Karp will also share a set of categories that many researchers and national organizations have opted to use to make sense within the field. Our categories here aim to describe the delivery and programmatic differences across the strategies, so that you can start to understand the range of strategies that states, districts, and schools are pursuing in this space. I'd like to note that the most common strategy used across secondary and post-secondary education is typically advanced coursework, which many of you know as the Advanced Placement Program, the International Baccalaureate Program. Here you can see our other categories include areas, the specific space in which the content is delivered, as well as the type of content that is delivered. And finally, as we look to acceleration solely within the post-secondary space, we're seeing two similar strategies to the secondary space, where students have opportunities to change the timeline to gain content and build academic momentum. If you're interested in learning more about accelerated remediation, I would encourage you to watch the August 15th webinar from the CCRS Center and AYPF on transforming remediation. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Thomas Akampora from Talent Development Secondary. Thomas?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. So when I talk about talent development secondary, it's a program, it's a whole school reform strategy that is intended to help students at a whole different levels. And our core belief around our students and around how we operate as an organization is that all students have the gifts and talents and can learn at high levels, given their adequate resources and support. And so the plan is that regardless of whether students are advanced, whether students need remedial work, or whether students are precisely where they ought to be, there are all sorts of different strategies and supports that can provide those students to ensure they're building that academic momentum towards success. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our results. So this is from I'm going to highlight one school. It's in Boston, Burke High School, because we've got the most longitudinal data there to show over 4 years worth of data that shows sort of the progress of students on their achievement tests from MCAS. In addition, Clinton Middle School, Emmanuel Arts High School in Los Angeles each gained more than 30 points in their academic performance index, which is the overall accountability measure in California, and that was 10 times greater than the District of LA as a whole. These are both examples of our success in schools, and this is replicated in many, many, many sites across the country. In fact, we are in roughly 50 schools, serving about 50,000 students across the country, and our efforts are intended to bring research and practice together. So in my office sits researchers as well as sits practitioners, and the goal is to take the best of what the researchers are coming up with the best minds who are in practice and implement them successfully in schools. And so when we look at the research around high school students and why we lose students in that pipeline, there is a huge reason why students aren't successful in middle and high school, and there's three sort of primary reasons. They either have poor preparation, there's apathy, sort of disengagement, and students don't feel like they know anybody. There's sort of an anonymity factor where students don't feel like they belong, don't feel like school is a part of their culture, a part of their life. It's not a place where they feel part of the community. And so talent development addresses all three of these factors in sort of systematic ways. And I'm going to focus most of our conversation today on the first one, which is poor preparation, because that's ultimately what acceleration coursework is about. It's about taking students who aren't properly prepared for middle and high school and ensuring their success in the secondary space. And so we do our sort of 4 pillars of transformation is that the sort of underlying all of it is an essential premise that we need to create small learning communities where students feel part of a community and feel part of a greater whole, as well as the adults in the building. So that there's the power of team, both at the student level and at the adult level in the building. That those teams have access to real data to make really nimble and really nimble choices around curriculum and instruction, and we offer certain courses to help students who are behind in their reading and math improve. And then we notice that we need, for those students who that's just not enough, a great lesson every day is not enough, we need to provide a more systematic tiered support system that might involve tutoring, that might involve other care, might involve special educators to make sure that students are successful. And then finally, there needs to be a can-do culture, a climate of success in the building. So we talk about that. Jennifer talked about that academic momentum. It's on a student level, but it's also on a school level. There's a reason why schools who are successful take students who aren't, who otherwise wouldn't be successful and make them successful. And that's because the school culture itself gives students some of that momentum and some of that success, a sense of success. So what is the challenge around acceleration in the secondary space? Well, there's 2 things I think that are the primary challenges. One is that many students enter middle and high school with deficiencies in literacy or numeracy. So, you know, I'll take an example of one of the schools I've worked with in Washington, D.C., where the average reading level of a 9th grader was grade 4. The average math level was grade 5. And that's not an uncommon experience of a lot of urban high schools across the country. We've seen those results in Baltimore and New York and Boston and Chicago and Detroit and Houston and Miami and L.A. And then the second part of that is that many students have been unsuccessful in high school math and English courses. And so what we've got is a whole, if you look at a large group of our sort of most underperforming high schools in the country, there's a huge number of freshmen and then very few sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So, you know, I've seen schools where half of the entire student body is in the 9th grade, or even more than half of the student body is in the 9th grade. And the reason for that is that most districts and states require students to pass English 1 and Algebra 1 in order to be promoted to 10th grade. And when students are unsuccessful in those classes, or they don't earn enough credits in 9th grade to be promoted, they remain in the 9th grade. And that creates all sorts of challenges. It creates challenges on the school level, but also for the student. You know, your chances of graduating high school and being academically successful in college drop dramatically when you repeat a grade, particularly when you repeat the 9th grade. And so schools and districts and states are really struggling with this combination, right? Because these 2 things sort of go together, right? One is students are coming unprepared to middle and high school, and then they're finding that they're not successful and are repeating courses, and oftentimes they're repeating coursework that they've already failed with little change. And from a sort of broader societal level, it sounds, you know, in reality, most schools' acceleration strategy is repeating. And that, you know, costs the school nothing, right? Because if I'm a student, and I'm a student in X year and I'm a student in Y year, I get the school gets the same amount of budget for that student, but from a societal level, we're spending an enormous amount of extra money to educate that student for another whole full year. And so we're thinking is, how do we intervene with students early enough so that students can be successful? Now, sort of coming down the pipe, there are 2 sort of bigger challenges that are arising. And one is that with the Common Core, standards are increasingly demanding that students complete more rigorous academic work, and that's absolutely wonderful. It's great to see that sort of expectations and standards are on the rise and sort of being common across many states and districts. But the challenge that brings is that we need to provide even more supports for students to be successful. Otherwise, we're just raising the bar without raising the supports to get kids to reach that bar. Just means that more students will be left behind and more students won't sort of achieve that academic momentum. And the last thing I would say is that, and this goes back to the idea of just repeating a class, simply taking longer or having students encounter more difficult work, the research is showing that is not a successful strategy to teach kids the essential skills and strategies to complete that work independently. And so I give the example of, you know, every person's got sort of a level at which they're at frustration level. So, you know, if I handed the average adult in the country the U.S. tax code, the average person probably couldn't sift through that and figure it out without some sort of assistance. without some sort of help from someone who knows the jargon and knows the language. And so when you give students a text or you give students mathematical work that is well above their capabilities, in reality, all you're doing is you're making them shut down. And in those classrooms, and this is just from my own observations, in those classrooms, what happens is that teachers end up doing all the thinking and work in the classroom. So the teachers are reading to the students, or they're rereading to the students, or they're reteaching, or they're showing kids or explaining to kids what this means. And in reality, that means the teacher is doing all of the reading and all of the thinking, and the students' skills are not increasing at all. And so how do we solve this challenge? How does talent development solve these challenges around students coming into middle and high school underprepared? And so the first strategy that we use is standalone courses that are designed to meet students where they are and accelerate their learning to ensure they're prepared for on-grade level content. And this is possible due to the unique strength of secondary students. So the reason why you can take a 7th grader and move them from a grade 2 reading level and a grade 6 reading level in maybe a year is because a 7th grader has a much more complex, from a neurological perspective, much more complicated brain, and is capable of doing a lot more than a 2nd grader. And so the advantage is that while students are behind, they actually can catch up. But you need to create time in that schedule and an academic space for them to do that. This also requires a different approach, right? If the traditional curriculum was going to work for these students, it would have already worked. For some reason, it hasn't worked, and we need to figure out an alternative. And we need to focus on the skills and strategies that enable and prepare students to be successful in an on-grade level course. And these courses ideally occur before students are required to complete their grade level content. So this is what sort of Jennifer referred to earlier as double dosing, right? So I double the time. So before you take your required English 1 course or your required middle school math course, you take an additional course that is sort of catching you up, that's sort of accelerating you to the point where you're capable of handling on-grade level work. And part of this solution requires 2 other things. So the other part of that solution is that once we've taught you those strategies and skills within a catch-up course, that you then translate those skills into the core content courses when you take them next. And finally, there needs to be either twilight school, which is sort of school that occurs after the school day, or other opportunities for credit recovery for students who have been unsuccessful and who are overage for where they ought to be in their academic path. Because being overage and having repeated a grade has a huge impact on your eventual ability to be successful in college and beyond. And we need students to sort of catch up as soon as possible. And so that might mean having other ways for students to sort of catch up in terms of their credits so they can graduate with their same age peers. So what are the capacity and barriers? What are the school capacity needs and barriers required to sort of implement this? Well, the first is there needs to be a lot of professional development because this requires a shift in teaching practices. Most secondary teachers are not trained in how to help students with basic literacy and numeracy skills, and so feel way out of their depth when they have students who are far behind grade level and sort of don't know what to do with them, don't know how to help those students. The second thing is that when it comes to standards, we need to be understanding that students have to have the ability to take some sort of acceleration to be prepared to achieve on grade level, standard level work. So when you take an acceleration course, you may not be doing what you ought to be doing in that grade level for those standards. And that makes perfect sense because if you're not ready for that work, then we've got to reach back to sort of give you the skills and strategies you need to be successful. And so we've got to be able to carve that academic space out in schools and districts and states. And the second, on a sort of broader issue, there's the issue of sort of school organization and staffing. So first is if you're going to increase the amount of time you're spending on literacy and numeracy because you've got, you're adding extra time into the school day, you're going to need more literacy and numeracy teachers and specialists. And you've got to have a schedule that provides for that extended learning time and provides for opportunities for recovery. And so this doesn't necessarily require more funding necessarily, but it does require a shift in how we manage and use our resources. And I think at this point I'm ready for any questions from the audience.
Great. Thanks so much, Thomas. That was a fabulous presentation. A couple clarifying questions have come in about the talent development secondary model. First, throughout your presentation, you mentioned a number of urban settings where talent development has been implemented. Folks are curious whether or not you've also implemented this in more suburban and rural settings.
Yes, not as often because that's generally speaking where there is we tend to work with schools that have the highest need, and we're specifically focused on the dropout issue, and so we're focusing on high urban schools with huge numbers of high dropouts. However, we've also implemented it in Ware County, Georgia, and in other sort of rural and suburban districts as well as needed. At one point, we were in several using our acceleration curriculum in several counties in Virginia, both rural and suburban. So I think there is, it has been used, but it's primarily, our primary work has been in urban settings, although we have also worked in rural and suburban settings as well.
Great, thanks. And then folks are curious, given that your name is Talent Development Secondary, is this an intervention that typically starts in 9th grade, or is it something that starts earlier or perhaps even later?
So our typical focus is on grade 6 and grade 9. Those are the two transition years where we tend to lose the most amount of students. So our typical focus is working with middle schools and working with high schools at the sort of grade 6 and grade 9 level. However, we work with students who need acceleration and who need extra support all throughout middle and high school. And in fact, we've also even been looking at, more recently, looking at courses and work designed at the upper levels of high school to prepare kids for college and to prepare kids for, say, college level content in an AP course or in a dual enrollment course that Melinda will talk more about in the next presentation.
Great, and we just have one more question, although you did give us a fabulous transition to Melinda, but folks are curious a little bit about how you manage this idea of providing students with the basic skills classes prior to transitioning them into their content classes. Can you talk to us a little bit what a schedule might look like at the student level?
Sure. So for a student, what that might mean is we move to sort of a 90-minute block schedule in which students are taking 4 classes a day that are 90 minutes in length for the whole day, every single day of the week. And then what you have is, for the first semester, students would take that acceleration skill building course. So between September and January, students take a strategic reading or take reading, writing your career or one of our other acceleration courses. And then they take English 1 or English 2 or English 3 in the second semester from sort of January to June. So moving to a block schedule, but sort of actually building in basically 2 blocks of English within their given day. In the middle school space, sometimes I say that's the easiest way to get there, but we've worked with countless different types of schedules and countless different ways in which to do this. There's no one, it has to be only this way to do it. So I've seen schools do it within 45-minute periods, all sorts of different ways. The key thing, though, is basically to ensure that students have 90 minutes of that course all year long so that you're basically doubling the amount of time that they're spending on that content.
Fabulous. That makes a lot of sense, and it gets at this idea of double dosing, which we both mentioned. So I want to thank Thomas for his presentation and know that he'll continue to be available for questions during the webinar. But I'd like to transition to Melinda Karp from the Community College Research Center at Teachers College at Columbia University. Melinda.
Hi, and thank you. I'm here to talk about dual enrollment, which, as Jennifer mentioned, is an acceleration strategy that spans secondary and post-secondary. So rather than focusing on just one sector, this is really a boundary crossing strategy, focusing on 2 sectors of higher ed that both play a part in propelling students towards college completion. Jennifer mentioned at the very beginning that the terminology in this space is somewhat contradictory and confusing. So what I'd like to do is start off by defining what I mean by dual enrollment. In the brief that Jennifer mentioned, she used the term concurrent enrollment, dual enrollment. She mentioned advanced coursework, or what I sometimes call credit by exam. You'll see on this slide that I've listed a number of different ways, essentially, that students can earn college credit while still in high school. All of these initiatives are targeted at high school students. Some of them, all of them help students earn college credit. Some of them do that via sort of external mechanisms like an exam or a petition. Those are the bottom 2 rows, and I'm not really going to talk about those today. Some of them help students earn college credit by actually letting students enroll in actual college courses that generate a transcript. And from an acceleration perspective, that transcript is very important. important because it does a couple of things that I'll talk about in a few minutes. The top 3 rows on this slide set some general terms that I'm going to use throughout the presentation. Others, again, use slightly different terms, and in fact, some states define this slightly differently. So, for example, in Tennessee, dual credit is defined entirely differently than how I'm going to do it. But these are sort of the general terms that are used most commonly nationally and that I'll be using today. You can think of dual enrollment as sort of the umbrella term for all of these initiatives. It's sort of the big bucket version of this. It's when high school students enroll in a high school course and a college course simultaneously. So perhaps half of the day they're taking courses through high school, and then in the afternoon they take a college course. They're dually enrolled in 2 institutions, high school and college. And again, the important thing is that that college course is not college level, it's not college content, it is actual content using a college textbook, a college syllabus, a college instructor, and generating a college transcript and immediate college credit. Sometimes students earn credit twice for the same college course. So I'm a high school student and I'm enrolled in English 101 through my local community college. Sometimes I just get that college credit, but sometimes that English 101 course counts as both my senior year English course and as a college course. So I'm generating dual credit. That's the second row here. In essence, it's the same thing as dual enrollment, but it's leading to 2 credits at the same time, hence the term dual credit. So some dual enrollment courses are dual credit, but not all dual enrollment courses are dual credit. But all dual credit courses are dual enrollment. You can see how the umbrella starts to work. Then there's middle and early college high schools. Those are a standalone model, typically an entire high school structured essentially around dual enrollment, intended to exploit this model to really propel students rapidly towards earning both a high school degree and a college credential or substantial numbers of college credits. Students may start taking dual enrollment as early as their freshman year, and the idea is to allow them to accrue as many college credits as they can prior to high school graduation. So all 3 of those top dual enrollment, dual credit, and middle early colleges are ways of helping high school students earn college credit. I'm going to talk about them all sort of in the same group and just use the umbrella term dual enrollment because they all lead to the same thing, which is, again, a high school student with a college transcript and credits that they can bring with them, just like any other transfer student, to any post-secondary institution to which they might matriculate. The question becomes, why are we interested in dual enrollment? And we're really talking about why are we doing this for acceleration. Dual enrollment's been growing rapidly around the country for the past 10 or 12 years. And there are lots of reasons for that. But when we think about dual enrollment as acceleration, we need to go back to that graphic that Jennifer showed us at the very beginning of the pipeline. College completion is a pipeline issue. It doesn't start the semester before college graduation. College completion starts way back in high school with academic preparation. In order to graduate from college, you have to be academically prepared, and then you have to graduate from high school. Then you actually have to enter college, then you have to stick around, and then you can earn enough credits to complete. If you look at this graphic, you'll see that each of the dots is smaller, indicating that a smaller number of students makes it to each step of the pipeline. The reason dual enrollment is compelling is because, as I'll show you in a second, the research shows that it touches on all of these moments in the pipeline. You can think of the blue behind the green circles as a gap at each step of the pipeline. It's a leaky pipeline, and students fall out at each moment, which is why those circles get smaller. What dual enrollment does is it helps bridge those circles and move students at those key loss points so that rather than falling out of the gap, they're able to go from circle to circle and progress through the pipeline towards college completion. It does this by creating momentum that propels students over that gap and on to the next step. I want to emphasize that this doesn't mean that students who participate in dual enrollment necessarily earn a college credential faster. We're not taking a 4-year degree and necessarily turning it into a 3-year degree. What dual enrollment tends to do is provide students with a smoother, straighter path to a degree. It may not be faster, but at least they get there. They don't fall off the pipeline, they stay on it. And so in that way, they're accelerated. But acceleration doesn't necessarily mean more rapidly in this case. It means more efficient and more effective. Now, why do I say this? I say this because dual enrollment has a growing body of research showing that it's related to positive outcomes for students at a range of moments across this pipeline. And I'll point out that the research that I'm about to cite does a couple of things methodologically that are really important. What these studies do is they take as their starting point the fact that students who participate in something like a dual enrollment program tend to be different from the high school student population in large. They're often more motivated. They're opting to take a college course as juniors or seniors in high school. They also often have slightly higher grades to start with because most dual enrollment programs require at least a base degree of college readiness for participation. So you don't want to just say dual enrollment students do better than non-dual enrollment students and assume that it's the program or the dual enrollment intervention that led to those outcomes, because it may well be that those students would have done better anyway. All of the research that I'm about to share with you controls through a variety of mechanisms for the fact that dual enrollment students tend to start out a little bit different. And what this research shows us is that over and above those pre-existing differences, dual enrollment participants tend to be more successful. When we compare similar dual enrollment students and non-dual enrollment participants, we find that dual enrollment encourages college readiness. It starts with that academic preparation. Students who participate in dual enrollment learn the content, but also the study skills, the habits, the norms, the how to play a part of a college student, all of those things that are really important precursors to future success in college. In doing so, it also encourages high school graduation. We find that participants in dual enrollment tend to graduate at rates that are higher than similar non-participants. And then, importantly, dual enrollment participants end up enrolling in college at greater rates. Once they get to college, that's only the first half of the battle. We find that students who participate in dual enrollment also are more successful in post-secondary education once they get there. They have better college grade point averages. They're more likely to persist to a second year of college. They accrue more credits. And there are recent studies, and these are a little harder to find because you have to actually let students graduate to get to a point where you can say this. But we do have some studies that show that dual enrollment participation is positively related to improved likelihood of degree completion. So all along that pipeline, students who participate tend to have better outcomes than similar non-participants. It's important to note that the program model, course rigor, and implementation quality do matter. It's not enough to just slap, a college name on a course and say it's dual enrollment. It needs to be a real, authentic, true college experience for students that culminates in that college credit. Otherwise, the impacts are muted. Now, this is a lot of positive outcomes for one program. I'm sorry, I forgot that this also benefits all students. It's important to point out that in the old days, we used to assume that dual enrollment was really beneficial mainly for the highest achievers, and what we've found over the past 8 to 10 years is that many students benefit from this program. So it's not just your advanced students, but everybody, career and technical education students, males and low-income students, and those are the groups of students who tend to be underrepresented in higher education. Low-income, first-generation, otherwise disadvantaged students, the very students who struggle the most and who are most often lost in that leaky pipeline, they do benefit from participation. So it's important to note that expanding access to dual enrollment is a promising strategy for increasing the college completion pipeline. And so to come back to the point I was about to make about why, well, there are a lot of potential reasons. And I'll say that the data right now aren't great for teasing out the particulars, but based on what we know and based on the qualitative evidence, there are a couple of things that seem to be happening with dual enrollment that relate to acceleration. The first is that it's rigorous. And so that, of course, gives students that strong academic grounding. Similarly, it may be that some students have a shorter time to degree and or lower out-of-pocket expenses. If some programs are free to students, and if it stands to reason that if you've earned free college credits, you're likely to persist and complete. It also stands to reason that if you've been successful in one college class, let's say in high school, you're more likely to feel like it's okay to enroll in college. I can do this. I'm motivated. I know I was successful before. I can stick it out, and I'm going to do it again. And so some students may just be more motivated and ready to not just graduate from high school, but enter college and try it out and be successful once there. Similarly, students enter college understanding what's expected of them. Therefore, they're able to be successful in a college classroom. When it comes to acceleration, perhaps the most promising of these potential mechanisms is the nest egg mechanism. You'll see that on the far right side of the graphic. There's research that shows that there's sort of a nest egg effect to college credit. Students who meet specific momentum points, 15 college credits being an important one, tend to be propelled towards completion at greater rates than students who never reach that momentum point. So it's almost like once you've reached that 15 credit mark, you have something to hold on to. There's something really substantial. 15 credits is really meaningful, and you're more likely to stick it out and make it all the way to the end because you have that nest egg already accrued that you can hold on to. Students who earn college credit while in high school reach that 15 credit point by definition more quickly. And so they reach that momentum point that can propel them through the rest of the pipeline more quickly. And so we think that has an important part to play in accelerating students to completion. Finally, I want to point out that this looks really different. Jennifer alluded to this at the beginning. Dual enrollment can look very different depending on the type of program that you're in. And some of these program elements are policy elements, and some of them are programmatic decisions. And whether it's policy or programmatic actually depends on the state you're in. So things like funding and student eligibility, some states actually have policies that structure what this looks like. Some places don't, and so then it's a programmatic decision. But I do want to point out that dual enrollment can look very different depending on which program you're in. We think that this matters for students. We have some suggestive evidence that the location is probably helpful if it's on a college campus, so that's not necessarily the case. We know that, for example, low-income students who participate, their participation rates go down if they're expected to pay. But we don't have data to show definitively that there's one best case or one best model. We think that authenticity and the supportive nature of dual enrollment are what really matter at the end of the day. So whether the dual enrollment program happens at a high school or a college, it's important that, again, it's really truly a college course that enables students to try on that part of a college student, lets them meet only a couple times a week and take only a couple of exams a week, and nobody's collecting their homework, and they're expected to talk about hard things in a way that's respectful, just like on a college campus, because that really encourages that accelerated learning of what it means to be a college student. On the flip side, it's important to remember that these are high school students. We don't want them to have F's on their college transcript. So there needs to be a way to scaffold students' learning so that they don't fail in their very first experience in a college course. That's completely against what folks are going for here. So figuring out how to balance all of those program elements in a way that's both authentic and supportive is the most important part of this sort of dance around dual enrollment and acceleration. We have some resources that I think we're going to put up while we talk about and take any questions that folks may have, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Melinda. That was super comprehensive, and we really appreciate you spending a little bit more time on clarifying the very challenging terminology in this space. I think you brought up a really important issue, and folks would love to see, particularly if the research is pointing in a particular direction, but this idea of authentic as well as supportive. I'm wondering if the research has pointed to specific strategies that either allow for an authentic experience or specific supports which have been effective in this space between secondary and post-secondary.
Sure, and I'm going to the researcher in me is going to clarify that by effective, a lot of this is very preliminary, so it's not causal. We don't know for sure that these things work. This is more suggestive, but we do have some strategies that we've seen that seem to be working. In terms of authenticity, one of the easiest ways to make something an authentic dual enrollment experience is allowing high school students to take their courses on a college campus with other college students. The downside to that is that that's prohibitive for many students, and it's much harder to scale up. Students may not have time to travel. They may not have the resources to travel to a college campus. So the most authentic way to do this is to have high school students go to a college campus. In absence of that, authenticity can happen on a high school campus when there's really strong communication and collaboration between the high school and the post-secondary institution. So professional development for high school teachers who are teaching a dual enrollment course, for example, so that they're not relying on their own memories of what college was like, but that they really know how college is taught today. Sometimes even bringing college professors to the high school is effective. Things as simple as allowing students to eat in their dual enrollment course on a high school campus, even though technically they're not supposed to eat in their high school classroom, allowing them to use the bathroom in the middle of a class period. This all sounds very silly and very elementary, but actually that's really different for many students in many high schools. And it's kind of important. It's that self-regulating aspect of college that high school students are often very surprised about when they show up in post-secondary education. So things like that are one strategy. And I'd say that when you start bringing high school and college personnel together, even if it's under the guise of dual enrollment, it's a really promising form of collaboration that has potential to expand the way teachers teach for college readiness outside of the dual enrollment environment. And so that's an added bonus. In terms of supportive, one of the strategies we've seen the most success with is providing access to first-time dual enrollment students to College 101 or Student Success courses. These are those courses that are taught frequently to freshmen. They're usually one credit. They sort of talk about study skills and college planning and sort of an orientation course. We've found that high schools that offer that to their first-time dual enrollment participations are seeing success because it's a pretty low-stakes, one-credit course that's still college. It still generates a transcript, but it allows them to set the stage and prepare their students for what will be expected of them in other dual enrollment courses down the line. So perhaps your second semester juniors just take this one credit College 101 course. They get their feet wet, they understand those expectations, and then they're ready to go in an academic dual enrollment course as seniors the following fall.
Great. Sounds like a really effective strategy and makes a lot of sense. In the research, or in the presentation on the research, you mentioned particular populations that have benefited, particularly males and low-income students. Folks are wondering if you could expand a little bit more on whether or not this was traditional dual enrollment or special programs targeted at these populations, and what additional supports might have been in place for them.
So it depends on the study on that slide. The particular bullet on the males and low-income students having potentially a bigger bang for their buck benefit came from a study that was done with traditional populations and traditional dual enrollment students. It was a large state. The rest of that slide, it kind of varied. The career and technical education finding was, for the most part, came from one study, although there's another study with CTE in there as well. But from one larger study that looked at career and technical education focused dual enrollment. So those partnerships were specifically looking at CTE students and targeting their dual enrollment coursework for CTE pathways. But we have done other studies that just include CTE students and find similar results. What's interesting about the dual enrollment research in general is that while the specifics vary a little bit from study to study, and one study may find positive outcomes for high school graduation, another one may not, overall the findings are pretty consistent, regardless of the focus of the program, regardless of the state or the data, regardless really of the type of statistical methodology that's used. They all generally point in the same direction, which is towards a positive outcome for participation, regardless of the type of student. And so the quibbles are probably methodological differences, but in general, the story is pretty consistent.
That's fabulous to hear, and it sounds like we have a few other researchers in the crowd as well, because folks are wondering what other type of research would be helpful to clarify some of the lingering questions or that we have in this space.
Sure. One of the biggest ones really is this issue around program model. Does it matter if the teacher is a college professor or not? Does it matter if students go to the college campus or not? We have hunches. We have suggested evidence. You know, the qualitative research is helpful. I'm obviously a big believer in that, since those who know me know that that's what I do. Unfortunately, right now, the data, particularly at the big data set level, don't let us do a lot of this. So my biggest plea is for folks to start keeping track of not just whether or not students participate in dual enrollment, but in what type. So right now, particularly at the state level, we know if a student took a college course in high school. What we don't know is where that course was offered or who taught that course. And so that makes it really hard to tease out in a rigorous statistical way what the impact of these different program models are. And if you look from program to program, it raises all sorts of questions about generalizability. So we know there are programs out there that are doing a really good job drilling down their data to this more nuanced level, but that's just a single program, and so you've less power from a statistical standpoint. But I think the big question becomes, how do we do this the best that we can? We now have a pretty good sense that dual enrollment is a promising strategy, and so people want to know what the best practice is, and we don't yet have the data to tell us that answer. So that's where I think the most fruitful place would be.
Great, and let's hope that there's folks out there that can help you or even willing to undertake that type of research. Before we move on, I want to thank Melinda for an excellent presentation and remind the audience to continue to submit your questions through the question box. Our panelists will be here for questions following our next presentation. I also at point in time want to pause and mention other upcoming webinars in this series. First, in January of 2014, we expect to have a webinar on recently released research on the early college movement. So one of the models that Melinda didn't have an opportunity to talk about now, we hope to spend some time talking about the research and the effective elements of practice in a future webinar. In addition, we anticipate having a webinar around roles for state policy, and as Melinda mentioned, there are some opportunities, particularly in this space between secondary and post-secondary education, where state policy has played an important role. And we can talk a little bit in a future webinar about opportunities for the policy environment. So I'd like to move on to our final presenter, Louisa Erickson with the Washington State IBEST program. And Louisa, take it away.
Thank you. Before I get started, I just want to kind of provide some context for IBEST and Washington State. So IBEST stands for Integrated Basic Education and Skills Training. And in Washington State, this is a program that we have implemented in all 34 of our community and technical colleges. Adult education is managed by the community college system here in Washington. In other states, that isn't necessarily the case. And then also our student population that we focus on isn't specifically youth, although students may qualify as youth under Workforce Investment Act definitions and such. We have other interventions for students that are looking for an alternative high school diploma or dual enrollment, but this particular strategy is for students that come to our system and qualify for federally supported levels of adult education. They may or may not have acquired a high school diploma or GED. They can still test into levels of adult education even with the credential, but we serve folks in IBEST that both do have that credential and do not. The target for students in terms of adult education and the federally supported level is ABE level 4 through 6 and ESL levels 5 and 6, and that translates to approximately grade level 6 in the K-12 setting. So in Washington, the reason why IBEST was created was it was probably about 10 years ago now, we realized that we really had a disconnect, that students were coming to the system and having a goal of getting to work with a quality living wage job and really starting a career. And while they were coming into our adult basic education system, that wasn't really what they were looking for. They weren't just looking to get their GED or bolster those adult education skills. So what we wanted to do was figure out how do we get students moving forward into what they're really looking for, especially when we found that only 13% of ESL students and less than 1/3 of ABE students continued on to college level work. And then really to highlight that only 4 to 6% of those that actually continued on to college level ended up getting 45 or more college credits or earning a certificate or degree within 5 years. So we're on the quarter system, so 45 college credits would be like a full-time year of college. And to look and see that someone wasn't able to move that pace within 5 years was really concerning for us. So what we did was we went out to the system, to our community college system, and said, what do you think we could do to make this work, to get students moving forward and into college level classes? And what happened was IBEST was born through a pilot with initially 5 colleges, and then a second pilot with 10 colleges, and then scaled up to our entire system in January of 2007. So IBEST is really an instructional model and a kind of wraparound support model for students. And it pairs an adult education instructor with a vocational technical or content instructor from the college in the classroom at least 50% of the time. So students go into career pathways essentially, and say they are going into a nursing pathway or a business technology pathway. They're going to take college level classes, credit bearing classes, and have an ABE instructor in the classroom that is integrating adult education skills and competency into the content at least 50% of the time. They also will then meet separately for supplemental instruction outside the classroom with just the ABE instructor, and that work is contextualized to the content. So if they're in a business technology pathway, when they're focusing in on their literacy and numeracy, they're going to be doing it in the context of business technology. The programs must include college-level vocational credits. So this is not a continuing ed or that type of program. These are actual college-level credits and certificate programs. Students must qualify for federally supported levels of adult education. Like I said, the target is typically ABE levels 4 through 6, although some programs may look at it differently depending on industry requirements, and they also can, at their discretion, take students that score lower. One of the key pieces of the model is that the faculty develop the program and the curriculum jointly. So while the content curriculum for the professional technical pathway will never change, there has to be joint work that goes on between the two instructors where they work together to integrate those adult education competencies so that students are bolstering their skills simultaneously. Wraparound student support services, these are very important for students because as we have found and research supports, when students are provided with wraparound support services and linkages to the services they need while they are engaged in an educational program, they're more likely to remain in the program. So these support services would include linkages to emergency childcare, transportation, heating, utilities, housing, that type of thing, anything that could happen in the students' kind of life domains that would affect their ability to remain engaged in their academic programming. And then the programs at the colleges have to appear on the demand list for the local area. It's important for us that we don't want students to go through a course of study and then not be able to get out there and get the job that they came to us for. They want the skills and the competencies and the credentials that will allow them to move into the workplace with a living wage job and continue along that career with wage progression and career progression. So in Washington State, how we look at that at this time is exiting the program and completing the credential. Students have to make $13 per hour in most areas of Washington State, unless King County, then $15 per hour. So one of the really important aspects of this particular program is really entering it with mindfulness. And a couple of the other presenters have touched on this, and it's very important for IBEST as well. The colleges really have to know what they're getting themselves into when they do this. They can't just set up a career pathway program and put 2 instructors in the classroom and then expect it's just going to work out. Because there are students coming into these programs that have typically had not so positive experience with education in the past, in their K-12 experience, or maybe they have been lingering in the adult education pipeline before they find out about IBEST and their ability to accelerate into college level classes. So program planning and selection is very important, making sure again that local demand is met, and that also you're taking a look at the instructional teams and who is going to be in the classroom, how will they work together, and what does that look like? Making sure that there are college systems in place also to support those instructors with professional development and other things they may need in order to do this job, because it's really a different kind of undertaking. And then relationships are very important. I know in the first presentation, the presenter talked about an institution having a can-do attitude, and that's incredibly important. The culture shift that's required for this type of work is very important, and making sure that relationships are nurtured, that all stakeholders come together, and that everybody's on the same page in welcoming and supporting students is very important. And then the community-based organizations, being a part of the community or technical college, again, very important, because the community and technical college can't do everything for students that they need. Those partnerships are very important. So this slide here, I'm just sharing with you some of the data from our initial pilot, and this was an LPN, so a healthcare pathway at Renton Technical College, and you can see traditional students versus IBEST students. So traditional students that had come into this program were what you would call college ready. So they had taken a compass or acuplacer test and entered college ready, not in a developmental realm or in the ABE realm. And so you can see here that 18 traditional students entered and 13 IBEST students entered. I think one of the most interesting things is you see how many of the IBEST students remained percentage-wise and completed. There's a huge difference there. So one of the reasons that we think this is because in the IBEST program with the 2 teachers in the classroom, it's a higher touch and more engagement for students. You can see that the level gains were significant. And then at the bottom of the slide, this is one of my favorite slides to show about IBEST, is you see how many credits are attempted by the traditional students in the IBEST, successfully completed, and the percentage of credit completion, and then lastly, the grade point average. So we're talking about students that have been assessed at as low as 6th grade level, coming directly into college level coursework, and in comparison to the traditional students that entered college ready, you can see that they're attempting more credits, they're completing more credits, and their grade point average is higher. The grade point average also is reflected with the same content. There's no watering down, there's no dumbing down as some people ask about. It's the exact same content, just delivered in a different way, and students are able to achieve. You know, something that our last presenter mentioned was the nest egg and accrued college credits. I think this slide really kind of refers back to that as well. Some of the research we've found here at the State Board in Washington is that students that attempt at least 15 college credits tend to continue to take more credits and earn more credits over time. So we suggest that programs start their initial certificate along the pathway being at least 15 credits, so that students are more likely to earn higher levels of credits and continue to attempt more credits and earn them. And you can see the difference here between students that attempted less than 15 credits versus students who attempted at least 15. It's a pretty significant difference in terms of achievement. So now that we've been doing IBEST first in the pilot phase for 2 years and then now fully scaled up for just about 7 years, we found that there are some things that are working and some things that we need to improve on and some things that we'd like to add as well in order to help students be successful. In the last CCRC evaluation that came out regarding IBEST was last December, and CCRC has followed along with IBEST for several years and validated the results. But one of the things that they did find was that not all the pathways may be working smoothly to a higher level degree. And so what we wanted to do was find out what was the problem and how would we address that. If we can move to the next slide, that would be great. So a couple different things that we're doing here in Washington is we've expanded IBEST into the developmental education realm. We also have what we call academic IBEST, and we're doing what we call on-ramp to IBEST as well. In terms of IBEST for developmental education. Developmental education would be those students that come to the college and when they're assessed, they're not placing at college level. We're looking at how do we help students, again, accelerate right into college level, and then also how do we make sure that students have the competencies to really successfully complete the college level math and English particularly. So what we're looking at after we ran a 2-year pilot that was funded by the Gates Foundation is integrated, contextualized, accelerated, team-taught instruction for developmental education that extends the IBEST pathway through DevEd and helps ensure students are able to meet the college level math and English requirements that the colleges have. With a first level certificate in IBEST, sometimes students don't actually have to have the college level English or math to complete that first level certificate. But what we found was sometimes after they've completed that, they really weren't ready for that. So what we've done is found ways to help students get through those barrier classes. So we have just scaled up to our system a couple of program options, and the first one is delivered in our traditional IBEST methodology, and then extending the pathway to the next level of certificate with a bridge of the developmental ed math or English or both that are applicable to the certificate. And in that sense, students then are going to the next level certificate with the additional instructional support and with specific targeted intervention and support around math and English. Again, it's always contextualized to the career pathway, and then the academic content is integrated into the professional technical content as well. We also have developed what we call our accelerated outcomes model, and it's a little bit different than the acceleration we've talked about thus far today because it's really about acceleration within a particular quarter. And so what this model really looks like is colleges create a course that is kind of a holding tank for students, and regardless of where they place in their pre-college levels, whether it be developmental ed or ABE levels, all students are enrolled into the same class. The class is taught to the 101 level, and at 8 weeks, the instructors assess the students for where they're actually functioning and where their competencies lie. And at that time, the students are dropped out of the holding tank class and put into the class they're actually functioning at. So if somebody places into, say, Math 90, but after 8 weeks, they're functioning at Math 99, they're going to be placed into Math 99 and transcripted at Math 99. They're not going to have to take multiple levels of pre-college math. They're just going to have to finish that Math 99 and move on. This model will allow students to get to and through the college level English or math within 1 quarter. And ideally, if they don't do it within 1 quarter, it will happen within 2. And that's really different from the way that pre-college currently typically works. And I heard somebody say leaky pipeline earlier, and that's what the pre-college pipeline is. It's a leaky pipeline of students that get in there and they get trapped in there for a very long time if they don't leak out. Students that come into pre-college, whether it's developmental ed or adult education, very rarely actually transition and persist at college level. So during our DevEd pilot, I'm going to share some data with you because it was pretty exciting. We saw that students, this is one academic year here that you're taking a look at, accumulated an average of 42 college credits. So that's just a couple credits shy of a full load for the year, had a retention rate of 75%. That is pretty significant. The next bullet point, you'll see that 55% of the DevEd students starting in the lower levels of pre-college math increased at least 2 levels or earned college level math. And that is pretty significant given that most students do not move at least 1 developmental level per quarter, frequently taking classes over multiple times. In comparison, only 25% of the comparison students increased at the same level, earning 2 levels or earning college level math. And then 74% of the DevEd students starting in lower levels of pre-college English increased at least 2 levels or earned the college level English, while 49% of the comparison students did. And they had an average GPA of 2.9, which again is pretty significant given the fact that these are students that were not deemed college ready and were able to move into the college realm in an accelerated manner. Another piece that we have implemented is what we call academic IBEST, and this is for students that are going along the higher level of pathway to associate's degree and hopefully transfer and continue along the pathway to four-year degree. These classes are modeled after the traditional IBEST, but students are taking general education classes and they're paired together. So it may be something like a humanities class and a psychology class. And the classes are team taught, and then the content is shared within the classes. So the humanities class may be having a certain topic of instruction, and it will be infused into the psychology class as well, so that when they create their assignments, there's really a mix and support of the context between the two classes. And again, supplemental instruction is provided outside of the regular class to help kind of reinforce and bolster students around the academic content as well as the basic skills around literacy and numeracy that are needed. And then academic IBEST, as well as all of our IBEST programs in Washington State, qualifies for what we call enhanced FTEs. So we have a model where our colleges will earn 1.75 FTE for students enrolled in approved IBEST courses versus just 1 FTE to help support the additional costs that are associated with the program. And then another pilot that we have run here in Washington and have already expanded. This slide references 4 pilot programs at 4 colleges, looking at young adults ages 18 to 24, and these folks score in the lowest levels of ABE 1 through 3, and the intent is to get students from that adult education realm into an IBEST within 3 quarters. So that's really significant because it could take years for a student to sequentially go through the adult education and then the developmental education pathway before they could ever take college level courses. But what we're finding with the on-ramp is that students are able to actually transition into an IBEST, which is college level work, within 3 quarters. And when you think about ABE levels 1 through 3, I mean, we're going down to the very lowest levels of K-12 with adult learners. Washington State has expanded this to, I believe, 12 additional colleges at this point.
Great, Louisa. It sounds like there's a lot going on in Washington and that you've really been able to use the lessons learned from the acceleration model of IBEST to serve a variety of different students and create the right types of acceleration opportunities or accelerated learning to ensure that they do gain the academic momentum that we've been talking about. I do want to open it up right now to questions to everyone that's been a presenter today. And first, I do want to ask a couple clarifying questions to Louisa. Folks are wondering if you can talk a little bit about the wraparound services that are available in the IBEST program. What are the other types of support services that you're providing to students outside of the classroom?
So the way that the model is set up is for colleges to create linkages and collaboration with community-based organizations. We also use a navigator model. So we have navigators on site at the colleges that are affiliated with, say, the Workforce Development Council, or you may call them a WIB in your area, that help folks kind of access all of the services that would be available in the community and do that career navigation as well. So we have folks that are dedicated to helping students navigate the linkages that exist. But it doesn't mean that the college actually provides the supportive services per se, but they find the services that exist within their community and partner with them.
Oh, apologies. I was on mute there. Louisa, there was another question for you. Because the IBEST program is focused on providing students with vocational training, if you could talk a little bit about the role of employers, whether or not they're providing internship opportunities or how you've built relationships with them potentially to hire students.
Yeah, so one of the great things that the IBEST model has done is really capitalize on our existing partnerships with employers. So being a big community and technical college system where we are providing workforce training for our state, all of our approved workforce programs have to have employer advisory councils, and all of our IBEST programs are already approved workforce programs that are just delivered in a different instructional model. So they have advisory councils, and then they have agreements around, we have intern sites and clinical sites, and also opportunities for job shadowing and practice interviews and that type of thing. We even have, at one of our colleges, we have a program where they're doing what they call their Career Embedded Services Program, and their employers that are related to the career pathway are pretty highly engaged and have even visited in the classroom, and the students have the opportunity to visit employer sites. And this connection and the input that employers are allowed to give in terms of what kind of education they would like to see their future employees have helps them be really open to hiring our students, because we really are providing customized training.
Fabulous. That's great. Such an interesting additional dimension to this program. So I do want to open it up to questions to all the panelists, and I'm hoping that perhaps Melinda and Louisa can address this question. You both mentioned 15 credits as being a really important I guess, hurdles to get over in order to propel students to move forward and towards college completion. Melinda, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about where that's come from the research base, and Louisa, if you can talk about what that means for students, you know, what number of credits they're taking, how does that play against courses in ABE and vocational training. So, Melinda?
Sure. The first place that it really comes from was work done by Cliff Edelman using federal data. He's known for two studies called The Answers in the Toolbox, which used a huge, really big data set looking at students from all over the country and their transcripts. And he was the first one to really talk about this notion of a nest egg at 15 credits, because he found some sort of a relationship between that 15 credit moment and future completion. Colleagues of mine at CCRC actually using Washington data, so I'll let Louisa give a little bit more detail on this, found a very similar thing looking at data from Washington State. They found what they called momentum points, 15 credits being one of them. I believe it was 30 credits was another. So we've seen it in a couple of places. Folks have also replicated that work, again, using things like the NELS data. But it does seem like when you look at student transcripts, that 15 credit point for whatever reason seems to be particularly important, probably because it's about a semester, and I think once students really get that under their belt, then they can kind of move on with that. But if you're taking 3 credits here, 3 credits there, it's hard to feel like you're making progress. But there's something about having that full semester under your belt that seems to matter.
Louisa?
Yeah. Yeah, if you go back to our slide that I showed, I think that it's pretty clear why we felt like 15 credits was a cutoff. But the other thing is that it is relevant to the tipping point with us as well. So the tipping point research really showed that students, once they earn 15 college credits and a credential, had a significant economic bump. So that's what made us start looking at 15 credits as well in terms of momentum points. And when you look back at our slide there, you'll see that there's just a huge difference in terms of momentum around students who attempted at least 15 versus those who didn't. So you can see that, like in the first column there, for looking at the first 15 in the 06-07, 44% of students had momentum versus 8% who attempted less than 15 credits. And for us, the reason why momentum points are important is we have an initiative we call the Student Achievement Initiative, and it was created in order to help colleges look at what their real outcomes were rather than just folks that were enrolled. So we have an allocation model for funding, but we have this other kind of supportive performance-based funding that we've attached momentum points to, where colleges earn additional funds based on the outcomes, and the outcomes were decided within the college system based on what we really want to see. So, for instance, earning the first 15 credits, because we know that students are more likely to be successful both out in the workplace but also in continuing on to degree. The first 30 credits is another momentum point, completing college-level math and reaching the tipping point, which is 45 college credits and a credential.
Great. Um, so I want to open up this question to all the panelists, and Thomas, I'd like to start with you. Each of you has mentioned in a variety of different ways that teachers and faculty, in essence, are being asked to teach in a different way in these accelerated programs, sometimes in collaboration with someone in a different system with a different set of content knowledge. And I'm wondering, Thomas, if maybe you can start us off and talk a little bit about what professional development looks like for instructors in teaching in an accelerated model.
So I think it involves a couple of things, and I think that the key thing is a shift from a teacher-focused to a student-focused pedagogy. And so if you think about like traditional education, right, there's a teacher who's sort of guiding activities at the front of the class, might even be lecturing or might be sort of engaging kids in discussion or having students complete problem sets that they're walking through as a group. And we need to start shifting teachers to think about making much more individualistic student-centered learning choices. And that requires some level of differentiation, that requires having materials necessary to do that. Because the truth of the matter is that if you've got a class of kids who are all trying to accelerate, more likely than not, you're going to have kids at different levels within that group, right? You're going to have some kids who are further behind than others, some kids who are more advanced, and kids are going to have different skill needs. You know, mathematics in particular is often a subject in which you have sort of building blocks one upon the other, and sometimes if a student's missed a building block early on, they struggle with later mathematical concepts, and once you fill in that gap, they sort of improve. But you've got to assess each kid in your classroom. You might have, you know, a class of kids who are all reading or doing math somewhere between grades 3 and 4 or grades 5 and 6. But within that, they're going to have different needs. They're going to have different skill gaps that are preventing them from moving forward. And so you've got to both, one, have some really careful and measured assessments, and you've got to train teachers on how to evaluate those assessments in order to pinpoint where student gaps are in their skill sets and knowledge, and then train them on how to sort of catch those students up. And it's going to look different, and so that's going to require teachers to have structures in their classroom in which they are able to work with individual students or with small groups of students while other students are doing other things. So it's going to require a student-centered model in order to make that happen. I don't know if that sufficiently answer your question, or did I just get sort of too abstract?
No, I think that's great. I'd like to move it on to Melinda, because you talked a little bit about the opportunities for secondary and post-secondary teachers and faculty to collaborate, and I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little more.
Sure, and I think one thing to point out is that actually this happens less often than it probably could and should in many dual enrollment programs. So there's the ideal professional development for dual enrollment and what probably happens in most places, and the latter version is usually a brief meeting where, particularly for high school-based instructors, they're exposed to the college syllabus. They maybe meet a little bit with perhaps a coordinator who tells them sort of the expectations of dual enrollment, and then they're sort of left to teach the course on their own. What we see as being a more effective model is when instructors are really brought together in a meaningful way. This is hard in a dual enrollment program because if you'll recall at the very beginning, I said that this program spans 2 sectors, and that comes down to things as basic as when folks are available to meet for professional development. So if you want to get high school instructors and college instructors together, just the time of day that you do that and the contractual obligations can be really challenging to navigate. It always blows my mind, but you know, high school instructors are ready for PD at 3:30 in the afternoon, which is often when college faculty are teaching. High school instructors are loath to come to a meeting at 7 o'clock at night because they often have to teach at 8 o'clock the next morning or even earlier. So just literally getting people in a room is hard, but ideally that's what you would want to have happen. We have seen instances of really great, you know, mentoring or shadowing where instructors visit each other's classrooms. And I should say that, you know, we want authentic dual enrollment. So to some extent,
This is really important when high school teachers are teaching college coursework, as I alluded to make sure that they're able to create those norms within a high school classroom that make it feel like college. But on the flip side, high school instructors are often more trained in pedagogy than higher ed professionals, and so they bring really important pieces to the table as well in terms of helping college faculty think about their own teaching and moving away from the traditional lecture-based method of many introductory freshman year courses. So there's a lot of give and take that can happen, but how it happens is something that's been really hard to figure out and tends to happen on a partnership level, where you've got partners who are engaged in this work rather than something that I would say is broadly happening within the dual enrollment space.
Thanks. And Louisa, would you like to attack that question?
It's a very important question for us and something that we have approached with a lot of mindfulness. In Washington State, we have created a team teacher cadre, which is leaders from the IBEST program field that we have trained here at the state board to carry a consistent message regarding team teaching strategies. And like Melinda said, ABE instructors are trained in educational skills and strategy. They are instructors, that are helping people acquire those academic competencies, whereas a lot of professional, technical, or even other instructors in higher ed are not specifically trained in educational strategies. They're really good in their field. And so what we've tried to do with team teaching and with the IBEST model is really focus in on about 6 different models of teaching and sharing and jointly working together. And it's really important that folks do come together when we do our trainings, that they come with their team, because it's really about building a different kind of instructional model. And both ABE instructors and the career technical education instructors are used to having their own stage and their own classroom and doing things on their own timeline, and learning how to merge not just content and integrating adult education competencies, but merging personalities and styles and expectations of students is very important. So we do a day-and-a-half training for our instructors, and then additional training as follow-up to continue along and keep their skills fresh, and also so that they can inform us of emerging trends. And then we also work with the Accelerating Opportunity Initiative, which is replicating an IBEST-like model in 7 states, and have provided team teacher training in the Washington State model to 7 states and their college systems, and then about 20 states altogether. We provided information and professional development on team teaching because it's one of the most challenging aspects of the model, because it's a different way of providing instruction that a lot of folks just haven't practiced in the past.
Great. Well, it sounds like all of you are doing lots of innovative things in this professional development space. I'd like to turn it back over to Joe Harris from the College and Career Readiness and Success Center to close out today's webinar.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to our presenters, Thomas, Melinda, and Louisa, for sharing information about your exciting work. I want to remind folks that you will have access to a recorded version of this webinar on both the CCRS and AYPF websites at the address listed on your screen. We want to please be sure to complete the evaluation that you'll receive shortly after the webinar. We look forward to your joining us again for our additional webinars on acceleration after the new year. In the meantime, I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and safe travels to those who are joining others for the holidays.